I am 27 and my wife is 26. We have been married for 6 years and have known each other for 10 years. As high school sweethearts, we have been together since 2012. I was 17 and she was 16 at the time. I had only been with one person before my wife and I was her first boyfriend. So as far as ex-war experience go, we were both novices. We dated for 4 years before we got married, really young. When we decided to marry, I knew that our journey wouldn't be without its challenges. My wife had come from a tumultuous background, marked by unstable home and the haunting presence of substance abuse problems. So I was a breath of fresh air in her life. During our high school days, she would stay with me for days, and her parents wouldn't care that their daughter wasn't home. My mom and dad knew how much we loved each other and accepted her as part of the family earlier on. I was blessed to have parents who stood by my side, offering unwavering support throughout the entire process. From the moment I introduced my wife-to-be to my parents, they approached the situation with open hearts and minds. My parents came from a humble beginnings. My dad, 52, is a production supervisor at the local car plant. He has been working there for more than 30 years. My mom, 48, is a nurse. They had a 5-bedroom house, enough room for me and my 2 older siblings, so they were happy to have her around. They took the time to genuinely get to know my future wife. They knew the problem my wife's parents are going through and how they are negative influence in her life. They welcomed her into our family, offering her a safe and loving environment that she had never experienced before. Their acceptance and warmth provided her with a sense of belonging and stability that she desperately needed. In her 20th birthday, she gave birth to our first son. We got married the following year and moved into our home after I graduated from college, not too far away from my parents. My parents still wanted us to continue to live with them because they liked to be closer to their grandson. And since all my siblings were out of the house, the 5-bedroom seemed like an empty castle. After graduating, I found a job as a design engineer for the automotive company that my dad works at. My wife went to college to be a teacher, but we thought it's best she becomes a stay-at-home mom to take care of our growing family. My parents downsized from a 5-bedroom house to a 3-bedroom home to reduce their overhead, and because my siblings and my niece and nephew were only there during the holidays. Life has a way of presenting us with unforeseen challenges that test our resolve and shape our character. In my case, when I turned 24, my wife was pregnant with our 3rd child at the time when tragedy struck, and I almost died in a motorcycle accident. The motorcycle accident marked the beginning of a tumultuous period. As I dive into the narrative of my accident, the grueling months spent in the hospital, the loss of my income, the financial strain that caused my wife and child to stay with my parents, and the heart-wrenching realization that my wife slowly started losing interest in our relationship as the hospital visit dwindled and I felt like my mom was the only one that cared about me. Riding my motorcycle means freedom to me. It was an escape from the monotony of life. I would ride with my group of friends during the weekend. My parents hated it because they thought it was dangerous, especially my mom. My wife and I loved it because it became a way for us to spend more time with each other doing something that we love. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I sat out on my motorcycle, seeking a momentary escape from the pressure of life. Luckily, my wife wasn't riding behind me because she was 8 months pregnant. Little did I know that a split second of distraction would send my world into a tailspin. As I maneuvered through traffic, a collision from another vehicle sent me hurtling through the air, landing on the pavement with bone-crushing impact. The excruciating pain and subsequent loss of consciousness became my harsh introduction into a new reality. When I gained consciousness, the sterile environment of the hospital room surrounded me, and the gravity of my injury became apparent. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and a profound sense of physical vulnerability that left me dependent on medical professionals to navigate the arduous path of healing. I was lucky to have my family at my side. My mom especially cut her hours at work to spend more time with me. My wife had to return home frequently to take care of our 2 kids, plus she was 8 months pregnant at the time. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I underwent surgery and endure grueling rehabilitation sessions, determined to regain mobility and independence, while my body fought to heal. The lingering financial burden became increasingly apparent. The long months in the hospital resulted in loss of income, adding a profound sense of uncertainty and instability to my life. I was still recovering from my injuries when my wife gave birth to my daughter. My wife became financially dependent on my parents. The weight of responsibility for my growing family with a new baby intensified my distress. I didn't have any emergency funds to continue to pay my mortgage, and all the insurance money went towards my medical bill. The reality of our financial difficulties forced my wife and 3 children to seek shelter with my parents, compounding my feelings of inadequacy and powerlessness. The strain of my accident, prolonged hospitalization, and subsequent financial difficulties, the childbirth, had eroded the foundation of our relationship, leaving us emotionally detached. It got to a point that I would only get a visit twice a week from my wife, and when she comes, she brings my children. Seeing my children also aided my recovery because I was always in a good mood when they visit. My mom was the only stable presence, and she visited every day. Since all the financial burden is on my dad, his absence was understandable. Moreover, I would rather have my mom and my wife by my side. It didn't raise any alarm bell that my wife was not showing up as often as she should because she had a responsibility of a growing family. I eagerly anticipated being discharged from the hospital, going home, and sharing in the joy of our growing family. However, over time, it became evident that my wife's visit to the hospital had dwindled and her interest in my recovery had waned. It wasn't too obvious to me at the time, as I attributed her absence to the stress and overwhelming responsibilities she faced outside the hospital walls. I understood that managing our finances alone, taking care of our newborn, and coping with the emotional toll of my accident and hospitalization would undoubtedly take a toll on her. However, as time went on, her lack of presence became increasingly apparent, and I couldn't help but wonder what has caused the shift in her behavior. As I was too focused on my recovery to understand the reasons behind her diminishing visit, I wouldn't realize till later the deep underlying issue at play. Our prolonged separation had created a physical and emotional distance between us. I have always been a mama's boy, and my wife knew that, so I thought she wasn't showing up because she knew my mom was always there for me. Although I knew my dad was supporting us financially, I would inquire how she was faring financially because I felt helpless not being the provider. She would always tell me that my dad provides. I thought the pressure of taking care of our growing family took a toll on her emotional well-being and left her with little time or energy to devote to my recovery. After 7 months at the hospital, it was time to return home. I soon realized that the physical healing was not the only challenge I faced. The emotional toll of my accident and the subsequent strain on our relationship had left its mark on our intimacy. I found myself struggling to reconnect with my wife on a deeper and intimate level. The physical pain and the limitation caused by my injury played a significant role in my hesitance to engage in intimate moments. The fear of escaping my injuries or experiencing discomfort became a barrier that prevented me from fully embracing physical closeness with my wife. The trauma of the accident lingered in my mind, creating a sense of vulnerability that made it difficult for me to be fully present in those moments. 2 weeks after getting discharged from the hospital, I went back to work. I couldn't walk for long distance, and my movement was still awkward as I was still visiting physical therapy. Luckily, I was still mentally sound, and my work colleagues were glad to have me back. As life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy after my accident and recovery, I couldn't help but notice a new challenge emerging in my relationship with my wife. I thought it was because she wanted to move out of my parents' house, because I was noticing the friction between her and my mom. When I returned to my parents' home, I discovered that my wife was not as active in my children's life as I thought. Even though my mom was at the hospital taking care of me, she still comes back home to take care of my children and still goes to work. Obviously, this caused friction between my mom and my wife. I thought the best idea at the time was to separate both of them so my wife can have a place that she can call her own before my mom and wife damaged their relationship beyond repair. They went from acting like mom and daughter before my accident to arguing constantly when I returned home from the hospital. When I was discharged from the hospital, much to the chagrin of my parents, we decided to move into an apartment. After we moved into our new apartment, I noticed that she seemed increasingly distant, preoccupied, and constantly glued to her phone. The sense of emotional disconnection during XX plagued me during my recovery. During X, I felt like she was distant and it was just a chore for me to get off, like she couldn't wait for it to be over. I thought maybe because I wasn't 100% recovered, I still haven't gotten the full range of emotions on my hip. I was usually the dominant type in the bedroom during X, and she wasn't the type to ride or to take any sort of active initiative during X, besides BJ. So I thought it was a long road to recovery in the bedroom. However, as time went on, it became evident that there was more at play. Her constant presence on her phone, coupled with her reluctance to engage in meaningful conversation or spend quality time together, left me feeling isolated and concerned about the state of our relationship. The lack of transparency and open communication in our daily interaction fueled my insecurity and led to the erosion of trust. I began to question whether there was something more significant happening, whether there was another reason for her emotional distance and preoccupation with her phone. I came to the realization that this would be the reality of our marriage, maybe till I fully recovered. Her enjoyment gives me pleasure during X, so when I realized that she wasn't present, my interest dwindled, and my wife and I resorted into roommates. As the weight of my wife's disinterest in our relationship and the challenges of recovering from my accident settled upon me, I found myself sinking into the depths of depression. The overwhelming sense of sadness, hopelessness, and loneliness enveloped me, making it difficult to navigate through each day. My only source of happiness became my kids and my job as I began to lose interest in X. I thought the bond between my wife and I transcend X. We were friends before we were lovers. I thought our relationship would survive this. Till one day, when I received a call from my mother. We spoke on the phone often, and she felt as though my dad was having an affair. Since my dad and I work at the same plant, she was asking me if my dad was always at work. I told her that I don't know because I almost never see him at work. Our plant is big, and I am in the office most of the time. Since I don't see him at work unless we run into each other or we intend to meet up for lunch. She asked me if my dad had any attractive female subordinates, and I told her maybe. The truth is, I wasn't sure because I wasn't paying attention to his direct reports and didn't have any reason to. I thought my mom was being paranoid, and I was dismissive about it, which turned out to be a big mistake. I didn't factor in her experience and what she was going through, which was shameful on my part. My wife and I even laughed about it when I returned home that evening. Not even a month later, during a conversation on the phone, she told me that she bought a GPS tracker a few weeks ago and discovered that my dad was not working as much as he claimed and has been visiting cheap motels. That was when it got real. I believed her. I didn't tell my wife about that because it wasn't something to joke about. Repercussion of that could lead to the end of my parents' marriage. My mom and dad could separate if it turns out he was cheating on her. When I went to work, I asked around about my dad's hours, and I confirmed partly that my dad was not putting as much hours at work as he claimed. I planned on discussing it with my siblings, thinking that we could confront my dad together before it escalates further, as it wouldn't have been ideal for my parents to separate at their age after all they've been through together. Not too long after my mom told me about the GPS she had on my dad's car, she called me saying that she noticed my dad had a pattern of going to a particular hotel at a particular time. She wanted me to come along with her to confront him at the hotel. I was at work at the time, and I dropped everything I was doing to go along with her because I wanted to be able to control the situation and prevent it from escalating further. Confrontation like this could be dangerous, and I don't want my mom or anyone in that matter to get hurt. We arrived at the hotel in separate cars, and I saw my dad's car in the parking lot. My mom was already in the lobby waiting for me. I am not even going to tell you how my mom knew the room number of where my dad was staying, thinking she must have asked the front desk rep or they knew each other or something. But that wasn't on my mind at the time. All I knew was that I arrived at the lobby and my mom wanted us to go to room 256. That was where she claimed my dad was staying with his affair partner. On our way to the elevator, a housekeeping lady approached my mom, which confused me at first because they nodded like they knew each other before she followed us into the elevator. Maybe my mom paid the hotel housekeeping lady. Maybe she was a fake housekeeping lady, dressed to look like she works there. I don't know. It seemed like a planned operation. I told my mom that it would probably be a better idea to wait for them in the lobby, but she refused. We approached door 556, and my mom and I backed away from the view of the peephole. The house cleaning lady knocked on the door and said, "Housekeeping." That was when I heard my dad from the inside of room 256. He responded with, "No housekeeping." Then the housekeeping lady started saying something about a card payment and wouldn't relent. I could hear the frustration in my dad's voice, and he finally got tired of her and opened the room door to find out what she wanted. Immediately, my mom and I stormed through the door like the police, and my dad fell on the floor. My mom was more interested in finding out who the lady was, and we couldn't believe who we saw, trying to hide under the covers. The moment my mom and I walked into the room and discovered my father and my wife, our world came crashing down. We both were shocked and frozen in our step. My dad kept pacing around the room with both hands above his head, leaving us speechless and confused. My wife was still in the bed, under the covers, acting like we couldn't see her. I came to the hotel thinking that I would be there to stop my mom from tearing the other woman and my dad to pieces. Now I felt so weak and hyperventilating. I had to step out of the room to get some fresh air. While I was walking out of the room, I heard my mom threaten my wife and my dad. I went to the hallway and sat down, trying to process what I just witnessed. The discovery was incredibly painful. It shattered the illusion of a stable and loving family and still traumatized me till this day. I felt betrayed by both my dad and my wife. I remember my mom crying and dragging my wife out of the bed, but I was zoned out at that point. I felt like dying. I felt like things would never be the same in my life. Although every fiber in my body was telling me to walk away from the hotel and drive off, I couldn't leave my mom behind. I didn't feel angry at the time. I was just feeling betrayed and exhausted in the worst way. My dad was calling my name and apologizing, but I couldn't look at him in the face. I knew I had to be strong for my mom. This discovery would also be incredibly painful for her. I forced my mom to let go of my wife, and we both walked out the hotel while my mom cried. I took my mom home. She couldn't stop crying. Her anxiety was flaring up, so she took some medication to relax. Then she quickly fell asleep in the living room couch. It's been a long day. I had to make sure my kids were picked up from the daycare because I can't trust my wife to do so, not in the state my mom left her in the hotel. Before I left, I made sure I called my two siblings and told them what had happened, and they took the next available flight back home. My family was going through a crisis that we would never recover from, and the only thing that kept me going were my children. I picked up my kids from daycare and took them home. Apparently, she dropped them off at daycare so she can get a chance to sleep with my dad. I received a wall of texts from my wife apologizing. I didn't even attempt to read it. My natural instinct when I was going through crisis is to focus on work, but this time I have to make sure my mom was okay. So I took time off work to stay home with her. My dad was able to return home when my siblings returned to town. I wasn't there when they confronted him because I wouldn't stand to be in the same room as him. To me, he's as good as dead. It was important for each family member to prioritize their own well-being. The impact of such a discovery was emotionally and mentally overwhelming, leading to feeling of betrayal, anger, and insecurity. The process of accepting that our family would never be the same was incredibly difficult. It involves coming to terms with the loss of my wife and my father. The idealized version of a unity and loving family has been shattered. My wife finally returned home 3 days after D-Day. We sat together in a civil manner, trying to discuss how we can move forward. She confesses that the affair started after she gave birth while I was in the hospital. She said the burden of taking care of all the kids was so much and my dad was going above and beyond, and they started getting close. She claimed that he made her feel like she owes him something. And while my mom was in the hospital with me, they were watching TV one night and then things escalated. They continued to have sex till they felt my mom was becoming suspicious. That must have something to do with when all of a sudden there was tension between them. It was just my mom's energy sensing that my wife was a threat. After we moved out of my parents' house to an apartment, they started renting hotels and having sex in their cars. I was at work all the time, so I didn't notice my wife was off cheating with my dad. But my mother did. That was when she started suspecting that my dad was cheating. Not all stories end in happy ending. This one is not an exception. I was frank with my wife, and I told her that we'll be getting a divorce. My siblings came to town to make sure that my mom was okay. and that my dad would move out of the house. We all know that my dad has destroyed the family, and there is no way that we can recover from this and be as we were before. It has been about 9 months since D-Day, and I have finalized my divorce from my wife. My mom and dad's divorce are taking much longer because they had a lot of marital assets. I know hate is a strong word, but my mom hates my dad as much as I do. I don't even speak to him when we accidentally run into each other at work. He is dead to me. My now ex-wife returned to her teaching job, and we share 50-50 custody. I still haven't fully recovered from the motorcycle accident. I may never recover 100% mentally and physically because part of me was left on the roadside after that accident, and the other half was left at the hotel. But one thing that's for sure is that despite how much this accident took away from me and how much my wife and dad betrayed me, I am determined to recover and to get on with my life for the sake of my children. Thank you for making it to the end of this story. Please share your opinion in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't. Thank you and have a wonderful day.